welcome to the stream. Happy Thursday morning. Usually you're used to seeing my ugly mug on Thursday nights, and that will be no different tonight. Our 100th episode of On the Pen Live. You heard that right. Our 100th episode of On the Pen Live with the first live guest we ever had on this channel. BJ Davis will be joining me live on the pen tonight. I hope you'll all join us tonight at 9 p.m. Central. The video is posted to the top of the YouTube channel. Make sure that you hit a notification so that you can join us to celebrate. But we've got a lot to get into today. Was the Q4 2024 Eli Lilly earnings call. Yesterday, we covered the Novo Nordisk earnings call. There was a lot to talk about there. Today, we got the Eli Lilly earnings call. So I want to just lay out how we're going to do this. We're going to basically go over the top few things that I think are the most impactful to the community. And then we're going to sort of go through a flyover recap of the earnings call. We've been covering earnings calls for over 2 years on the pen. So if you've been around following our earnings call, put earnings call in the comments. We've been covering this for a long, long time. And one of the things that I like to tell people is that if you're new to On the Pen, we take information that flows about anti-obesity and type 2 diabetes medication. It flows from basically a source that's intended to deliver information to the medical community or to the investor community. Obviously, the earnings call is information that's intended for the investor community. So what we do it On the Pen, and quite marvelously, if I do say so myself, is we take this information and we basically translate it and put it into patient speak so that you as patients can take that information and basically use it to get better care, right? Have more competent and confident conversations with your doctor. So we're going to go over what the news is today on the 2024 Eli Lilly earnings call. If you're not following along at onthepen.com, we had a live update blog. I think we've got quite a few people, close to 1,000 people were following along there at onthepen.com. If you're not signed up for email alerts, I highly recommend you jump over to onthepen.com, sign up for those email alerts. You would have gotten an alert this morning. You could have followed along wherever you're at. But obviously, we do these videos to recap it as well. And so I'm going to just jump right into it today. Before we jump into it, however, I want to say hello to everyone in the chat. Hello, Sue, Squirrel, DJ, Jazzy, Donna. Welcome, Donna. It's good to have you here. Anna, Round Mountain is Zepbound. Good to have you here, bud. OG's in the house today. Lots of OGs. Michael Clanton, welcome. Thank you for being here. Sherry, Melissa, Tanya, Lori, bunch of people in here. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you will stick around. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button down below. A good bit of people who watch these videos are not subscribed. We'd love to have you. So let's get into it. Some of the biggest news out of today's earnings call would be, the first thing is that the Retatrutide phase 3 readout for their osteoarthritis trial is actually going to read out in late 2025 instead of in 2026. So we're going to get completed phase 3 data in Retatrutide in 2025. Now, it doesn't sound like it's going to push forward the timeline, which was something that I was curious about this morning as I read through the updates from Eli Lilly. It doesn't sound like it's going to actually move the timeline for the approval of Retatrutide, but we will get that information. One of the interesting questions that was asked sort of at the end of the earnings call was, will that osteoarthritis trial data give us a good idea of what weight loss will be in the weight loss trial? So there's obviously a lot of different trials running in parallel with each other. The Lilly brass basically said that the Retatrutide readout for osteoarthritis trial is not going to be a good point estimate of what the longer weight loss trials will show, just based upon the different design of the trials. But in the bottom line, I guess, for patients is we're going to get Retatrutide data in 2025. So that's kind of exciting news. Now I'm just going to gloss over some of the bullet points of what I found interesting in this earnings call. And it was basically from the question and answer session. Most everything else is a slide deck. We'll go through it briefly at the end of this video. But 1.5 times the amount of incretin sellable doses were made in the second half of 2024 versus 2023. So basically in the second half of 2024, which we just ended back at the end of December, Eli Lilly was manufacturing 1.5 times the amount of sellable incretin doses. Incretin, for those of you who don't know, is just the name of the class of medications for these anti-obesity medications that we talk about. About 1.5 times manufacturing of sellable doses. So that was a huge number. But to sort of add to that, Lilly expects to produce 1.6 times the amount of incretin sellable doses during the first half of 2025 than they did in 2024. And so what you're seeing here is massive supply manufacturing capacity coming online from Eli Lilly over the last couple of years. And apparently this doesn't even include the Concord plant in North Carolina, which they said in the earnings call will come online in 2025 here. And so that will be obviously a huge impact to those numbers that we just shared. At the end of 2024, Lilly told us in the earnings call that no wholesaler back orders of Mounjaro or Zepbound existed. So all of the wholesaler orders were being filled at the end of 2024. So it really does, start to put these data points together. You start to wonder, have they really in fact resolved the shortages of Zepbound? If you are experiencing shortages, I would love to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. If you are dealing with shortages of the branded versions of Zepbound and Mounjaro, I would love to hear from you, because honestly, from what I'm hearing on the ground, not many people are. Many people are telling me that they're even getting 3-month fills. So it sounds like accessibility as far as the supply is maybe actually getting better. So interested to hear from you what your current status is as far as getting the branded versions of these medications. At the end of 2024, in that last quarter there, Zepbound, when you measure by new prescriptions written, Zepbound became the market leader in anti-obesity medicine. Prior to was going to be Wegovy, which is semaglutide indicated for anti-obesity indication from Novo Nordisk, was the king of the hill. Now it is Zepbound, which is the weight loss version of Tirzepatide. I realize I'm being a bit redundant for those of you who are here all the time, but in case people are just joining and wondering what all these things we're talking about, Zepbound is now the king of the hill by measure of new prescriptions. So congratulations to Eli Lilly and their team on that. This was a very orforglipron heavy earnings call. We talked a lot about orforglipron. So just a couple of things that I found interesting on the orforglipron side is that they are launching a new clinical trial to test orforglipron in hypertension. So that will be an interesting one to see. Of course, there are 5 different studies in type 2 diabetes and 2 studies in obesity that we will get data on in 2025. So that is really exciting when you think about the future of anti-obesity medication, the pills, the pens, all of that stuff that we belabor in conversation here at On the Pen. The pill form of GLP-1, right? We have one, it's called Rybelsus. Lilly is releasing orforglipron probably in early 2026 after all this data drops in 2025. So it'll be very interesting to hear the readouts from that. One of the interesting data points that we did here to sort of set expectations from Eli Lilly, and this was the first time I had heard this, was that the weight loss that they anticipate seeing for orforglipron in diabetics will be significantly, these are their words, significantly lower than patients with obesity alone. And so if you are a diabetic person looking at orforglipron as a potential option, it sounds like the expectation is being set early on that it will not probably be a very good option if you have a lot of weight to lose. And so that was the first time I had heard that from Eli Lilly. Of course, this is the case across all incretins, whether we're talking about Ozempic or Mounjaro or what have you. Some of the earlier versions, diabetics lose less weight on GLP-1s. It is a proven fact throughout the clinical trials. It's significantly less. 22.5% weight loss on average for Zepbound in non-diabetic patients. I want to say that it was closer to 11 or 12% with Mounjaro for diabetics, right? So that's significantly less. That's about where I am as a type 2 diabetic. I kind of track with the results of the clinical trials at around 12% weight loss on Mounjaro. So I'm eagerly looking forward to the next generation of these drugs. That's why we continue to talk a lot about CagriSema here from Novo Nordisk. We talk a lot about Retatrutide from Eli Lilly. It's because folks like myself and folks like many of you who tune in each and every week are looking forward so much to the future of these medications to help us get to where we want to be from a health standpoint. A couple of other interesting data points before we get into the slide deck. New incretin focus areas for Eli Lilly in 2025. So we've talked so much about obviously diabetes and obesity, which were the initial indications for these drugs. Then came along the big ones for Eli Lilly this past year. Zepbound was approved as the first medication to treat obstructive sleep apnea. And so that's really exciting. We've got osteoarthritis studies, we've got heart failure studies, but what are some of the new frontiers that hold potential for these medications? And I want to just let you know what we heard from Eli Lilly today. We heard that they will be focusing in the future on areas of brain health, substance abuse disorders, pain, neuropsychiatry, and inflammation. So those are new areas of study that they will apply to these incretin mimetic drugs to hopefully expand access to these medications. Because one of the other things that we learned today is that commercial access for Zepbound, the anti-obesity medication version of Tirzepatide, is only at around 27%. When you compare that to market access for Mounjaro, that just means your insurance covers it. 27% for Zepbound. It's over 90% now for Mounjaro. And so there's a lot of headway to be made for people without type 2 diabetes to get access to these medications. And these are different backdoor indications. Now, one of the questions that was presented to the Eli Lilly leadership team that was on the call was, what about diabetes prevention? Zepbound has been shown that in a trial, and I believe it was 99% of the patients in the trial were pre-diabetic, or 100% of them were pre-diabetic, and 99% over a 3-year study did not develop type 2 diabetes. So as a diabetes prophylactic, Zepbound has definitely proven itself to be a worthy option. But the issue, as laid out by Eli Lilly today, is that type diabetes prevention doesn't actually have a precedent from the FDA as an indication, as something you can get covered through your insurance. And so it will not likely meaningfully increase coverage for Zepbound in the near term. But what are some of these other areas of focus? Brain health, substance abuse disorders, pain, neuropsychiatry, and inflammation, all being potential options to really help with increasing accessibility to these medications. Now, if you want to get all of the updates that I gave from the question and answer session, jump over to onthepen.com. I've linked it in the description of the video. There is an article up. If you just go to the landing page, onthepen.com, it's going to be the first article that shows up. I followed it all through the earnings call this morning, and it's all listed there. I believe I had 20 updates from the question and answer session. But let's get into the actual presentation from Eli Lilly and get into some of what that means for patients. If you're hanging around with me, welcome. Hit the thumbs up button while you're listening. If you're enjoying this recap, again, we give patient-centric information here at On the Pen of all the information that flows about anti-obesity and type 2 diabetes medication. Mike wants to know if there's any word on releasing of the vials. I should have led with that, Mike. I didn't. There was not. There was very little. There was a brief question at the end about how the vials will contribute to future access and how important the relationship with Ro is and their offerings of the vials. They definitely moved very quickly past the question. They basically said on the topic of Ro, it's about integrating access to FDA approved versions of Tirzepatide through really, really great technology and platforms that are out there. Ro, of course, in my opinion, has the technology that is second to none. They are, in full disclosure, a sponsor of the podcast and the live show, but they have tremendous technology, and it's about expanding access to the vials through the Ro platform without patients ever having to leave the Ro platform. So it's an integration with Lilly Direct in just as more of a seamless way for patients to get access to FDA approved medications. But they failed to address the second part of that question about how vials will sort of serve to improve accessibility to these drugs. So it was very clear it was a topic they didn't want to get to on the earnings call. So my own 10 cents is that it'll likely be something that'll happen between now and the next earnings call. This is kind of what we saw with the first vials. Like, we were waiting for it in Q1. We didn't get even a mention of it. In fact, they were like, well, we don't know. We'll see. And then by the second earnings call, they had of the year, they had the release of the vials. This is back in 2024. So I think you'll kind of see that. You've already heard from Dave Ricks himself that they are looking at more vials and at potentially a cheaper option for the lower doses, at least. So we'll have to see what happens. But unfortunately, no, there was not. So, and I had told some people that I wasn't going to cover this if they didn't release the vials. I am so sick of talking about it. Let's just get it in people's hands. People are fed up with the lack of accessibility to these medications from a cost perspective. They're fed up with the stress and anxiety around the OFA and FDA trial that's going on, which Eli Lilly did address with some very biased responses to what they thought about that. In fact, I'll just read it for you before we get into the slides. Lilly believes that they have full supply, right? And that compounding just simply should not exist. And they mentioned that there's a new sheriff in town in DC. And so it'll be interesting to see how all that plays into it. But they believe that compounding is an unsafe practice that, quote, shouldn't exist, and that it undermines innovation. So a very Lilly response, harsh response, as you would expect them to give, But we all know the reality of 503B pharmacies created for exactly this purpose, to increased supply of medications when manufacturers are unable to meet demand. So you hear Lilly giving some data points today to bolster their point about the medication being available commercially. You saw Novo Nordisk yesterday being a little bit more cryptic. So it'll be interesting, obviously, to see how it all plays out. And if you follow On the Pen, you know that we will be covering this extremely, extremely closely, as we have another plug for onthepen.com. But now, I promise, we're getting into the actual presentation. So we're going to jump forward here a little bit and talk about Zepbound. As Zepbound obviously was approved in the U.S. as the first and only prescription medicine for moderate to severe sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea, in patients with obesity. And they saw in the last quarter positive top-line results for the phase 3B SURMOUNT-5 study, showing 47% greater relative weight loss compared to Wegovy. That was a interesting head-to-head trial between semaglutide and Tirzepatide, and obviously Tirzepatide blew it out of the water, as Tirzepatide is a coagonist, works on 2 hormone receptors, where semaglutide is a straight GLP-1. Now, moving forward, a little bit more information about what happened with Zepbound this past year. They received regulatory approval for sleep apnea, like we just mentioned. They had the better results on the Wegovy versus Tirzepatide trial. The Summit trial showed Tirzepatide significantly reduced the risk of worsening heart failure events in adults with heart failure and obesity. And then the SURMOUNT-1 3-year study that we referenced earlier, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, showed Tirzepatide reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes progression in pre-diabetic adults. I believe it was 99% of patients, as we mentioned before. So just absolutely astounding. These medications are absolute game changers. That's why we're making a living out of this at On the Pen. When I started to learn what these medications can do for people, I thought, I am becoming an evangelist for this stuff. People are going to live longer. People are going to live better. And this isn't going anywhere. And so that's why we cover. You might be like, why would somebody cover the earnings call for a publicly traded company that makes medicine? Because it matters. Because there are over half of the adults living in the United States have obesity. 100 million people plus living with obesity, and that leads to a whole host of comorbidities, and that's a lot of what gets discussed on these earnings calls. So we'll move on and we'll talk a little bit about Mounjaro. You're noticing I'm skipping a lot of slides because it's investor information, and we pull out the information that means something to patients. Now, this is a little bit interesting here. U.S. type 2 diabetes injectable incretin market share is 37% for Mounjaro. They're continuing to erode at Ozempic's market dominance. new prescription market share. They're getting 44% of all new incretin type 2 diabetes prescriptions. And Lilly's total market share for the type 2 diabetes injectable incretins was 50% at the end of Q4 2024. So you see Lilly is continuing to erode at Novo, who was, they were first to the party with Ozempic. I mean, I realized there were medications before this, but nothing in the zeitgeist of American culture like Ozempic, right? So looking at Zepbound, branded, they own 48% of the branded caveat, branded anti-obesity market share at 48%. And they're owning new prescriptions at a market share of 56%. As I alluded to earlier, they are actually the king of the hill now. They have overtaken Wegovy. So looking a little bit at the future for Tirzepatide, we're going to take a look at slide 15 here. Not that boring one. This is an interesting slide here. If y'all can see it, I don't know how well you can see it on your screen, but this is all of Lilly's pipeline medications. And so what you see is each molecule essentially, and then the phase of trial that it's in. So in phase 3 trials, which is the last one before they can submit it to the FDA for regulatory approval, you can see that Tirzepatide or Orforglipron, Tirzepatide, you can see right underneath here all of the different outcomes. That's too small for me to read on the screen, but obstructive sleep apnea is a trial that they've launched for Orforglipron, which is really interesting. That's new information to me. Retatrutide in diabetes, Tirzepatide in cardiovascular outcomes. As you go on here, you see another one for Orforglipron and type 2 diabetes, Retatrutide in obesity, osteoarthritis, and obstructive sleep apnea, or Orforglipron and obesity. So it just shows which medications are in which stage. This is the one that I'm most excited about. If you look at phase 2 towards the bottom, Eloralintide, and that's what I was hoping to hear a little bit more about on the earnings call today. Eloralintide is a amylin agonist in phase 2 clinical trials that Lilly is looking to combine with potentially Tirzepatide or Retatrutide in the future to have like another pathway for weight loss. Amylin, of course, a hormone co-secreted in your pancreas along with insulin, holds a lot of hope for diabetics especially. So I'm excited about Eloralintide and look forward to hearing a little bit more in the future from Eli Lilly on that one. You can see that the Orforglipron trials are running hot and heavy. They're trying to go all sorts of indications because they're going to be able to make so much of it. The more indications that they can have are going to just be really, really good for the future of accessibility to these medications. Moving along here, we're going to jump way ahead in the slideshow. If you're enjoying this, please hit the thumbs up button. Please subscribe if you're not already subscribed to updates here at On the Pen. We would love to have you sign up for email alerts too at onthepen.com/emails. So in Q4 of 2024, we've already kind of glossed over this, but some specific sales numbers are kind of interesting to look at. Q4 US sales for Mounjaro were $2.6 billion, and international sales hit $899 million. That will grow too. One of the things that we heard from the Lilly brass today is they really plan on aggressively moving into the ex-US markets with Mounjaro this year as supply increases, including a recent launch in China where Mounjaro is now available. They're slow rolling it out there, and as supply increases, which we talked about earlier, they will be offering more and more doses available in China. So that ex-US market, you see $2.6 billion in the US, you see that $899 million in the US. You'll see that gap start to close in the discrepancy and the disparity between those two numbers as they get really aggressive outside the US. A couple more things here that we'll get into. Tirzepatide obesity trials. We just want to take a look at those a little bit closer here. Sorry, so many slides going on here. So these are interesting slides. And if you're interested in getting these slides, I have them at onthepen.com in the article. Lilly posts them to their website too. But if you don't want to dig for them, just go to onthepen.com to my article about this. I have this here. This is always an interesting section because it shows all of the clinical trials that are going on right now currently for obesity in the different molecules. So for Tirzepatide, you can see we have a phase 3 trial, a study of tirzepatide for the maintenance of body weight reduction in participants who have obesity or overweight with weight-related comorbidities. So that looking at tirzepatide in specifically weight maintenance. So it's looking at how much weight loss a person can maintain during a 60-week weight loss maintenance period. You've got a study of tirzepatide once weekly in adolescent participants who have obesity or overweight with weight-related comorbidities, looking at the change in BMI. We have a study of tirzepatide in adolescents, looking at the percent. It looks like we have two studies sort of going together. I'll bet that has a difference in age, like the age categories of the participants. One is enrolling 150 participants, the other 300. But again, these are phase 3 trials. So when they get the data, and you can kind of see over on the far end where the trial starts and where the trial ends, and then you can deduct about 6 months after the trial ends, assuming everything goes well, is when you typically see that indication. Now, interestingly, the study, the largest study there, NTC 05556512, that super long one, a study of tirzepatide on the reduction of morbidity and mortality in adults with obesity. So looking at literally life expectancy, that is enrolling 15,374 patients, a huge number of patients. You just think about the amount of patients in clinical trials and how much this all costs. It starts to put into perspective why these medications cost so much money. So 15,000 patients in that study, looking at the time of first occurrence of any component event of composite all-cause mortality. And so that will be an interesting one where we'll get, it's probably a post-marketing study is my guess, but looks like we get data in October of 2027 on that. So anyway, just a cool section. I really encourage you all to go take a look at these slides yourself, kind of find what you find interesting. There's obviously some studies going on for some of the other molecules too. I think we jumped over Retatrutide. You can kind of see that they're running some very interesting trials there as well. Obviously, the big one that we talked about that we'll get data on this year is that osteoarthritis trial, but they're starting some other trials here, like the effect of Retatrutide once weekly on cardiovascular outcomes and renal function. That starts or that reads out in February of 2029. And looks like there's even more there. Effective Retatrutide comparing patients with type 2 diabetes versus other drugs. There's just so many of them going on. So please check it out. Rainey says, please implement a detailed segment in OTP specific to type 2 diabetes. Weight loss is only part of it. How Mounjaro is treating 12.4 A1C stabbing neuropathy. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reduction in A1C is a huge benefit of Mounjaro for type 2 diabetics. That's the main game, right? We're trying to control. There's so much. The thing I always try to explain to people when it comes to the weight loss, because that's what people zoom in on with these drugs. But I think one of the important things to note is they're doing so much more for a patient with diabetes, right? It's working on insulin resistance. It's working on making your pancreas more efficient. It's working on so many of those other things like neuropathy and the erosion of your vision and all of these things. So it's a great point, Rainey. Great point. So that's most of what I got here. The last thing I wanted to look at just real briefly was the eloralintide, which I talked about earlier, eloralintide being the amylin agonist. And I'm particularly excited about this one just because I think it'll be something you can add on to, even if Retatrutide doesn't get to you to where you want to be. By the time you get a year into Retatrutide, a year and a half into Retatrutide, they'll probably put a version of it out with eloralintide. So a couple studies that they're looking at here is a study of Tirzepatide compared with, jump over to, where did I miss the eloralintide? Sorry, I just lost my space on the slide. But they have a study going right now that I know is looking at Tirzepatide coupled with eloralintide. I'll get back to you on when that will actually drop the data will drop. But if you are interested in joining any of these clinical trials, I strongly recommend you visit clinicaltrials.gov. Just look up any of these molecules: Tirzepatide, eloralintide, Retatrutide, and even the Novo Nordisk CagriSema or amycretin. There are more that I'm not naming, but you can jump in on one of these trials. If you have a trial in your area running and you're struggling with access to medication, some of these trials are no loser trials. Like there's head-to-head trials right now with Tirzepatide and Retatrutide. Now, you don't lose in that trial, right? So check it out. Might be a good option for some of you who are looking to potentially get the medication, branded medication, and you get doctor oversight, blood work, all those things, and it's all free. So I highly recommend you check out clinicaltrials.gov. Maybe look at getting enrolled in one of these studies. That's the update. I wish we would have got some vial information today, but we did not. But I'm hopeful that between now and the next earnings call, which I want to say is May 1st, that we will get an update on that. I will keep you posted if I hear anything. I've got my ears to the ground. I have heard before the Super Bowl, so that's why I was like, well, it's the earnings calls before the Super Bowl, so we'll have to see what happens. But of course, we'll stay on top of it. Make sure that you're subscribed everywhere that you get your information. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for doing this recap. And thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. We'll catch you tonight for our 100th episode of On the Pen Live. Please be there. Please join us. We'd love to celebrate with you.